just then Shadow Melt off the aggro, so they just leave those inspired mobs behind and they just don't play them. But because of the Tyrannical, as you said, they're probably just gonna nuke a lot of them down. And Halls is not known to have mobs that are super dangerous that you need to interrupt, so some of those casts going through might not even be that bad.
That's right. Now we're getting ourselves ready for game number 1. Like we mentioned, quad question marks squaring off against Echo, our #1 seed. Let's get into it in Halls of Atonement.
All right, so we see Echo versus Quad question mark here. We see 2 different rounds already. We see but huge pulls coming in by both of the teams. Echo pulling everything to this left side over. It looks like they pulled 2 shards together. So this is 2 shards and all of the mobs in between. Huge amounts of damage coming in by this double thrash being casted.
Yeah, and I want to see also how much trash percentage this is going to be, because this is actually a crazy amount of trash, like you already mentioned. But look at the damage coming out of that Fire Mage with Combust and Power Infusion there, easily popping up over 50k over this course of this entire pull. And you can really see for both classes, for both teams, how powerful it is. One of the major differences you're seeing as well is how strong that Venthyr Holy Paladin is over on the side of question mark team. Ashen Hollow does a ton of damage, especially if they pair it together with the Mad Paragon Legendary.
Yeah, huge amounts of damage coming out of that Holy Paladin for sure. Now we see a skip coming in by Echo. So they did spawn that Pride mob, and they finished off all of the trash mobs. There was not the Pride. And then we saw now just tanking off the Pride mob. Xaylia going down, but they are out of combat, so they're just using a normal rest here from Maris to get Xaylia back up. But yeah, they were skipping the Pride mob here by using that Shadow Melt. Now was off tanking it, everyone else ran away, and then now leaped onto their team and they all Shadow Melted at the same time to make sure they are de-aggroing the Pride mob and just leaving it behind.
Yep, we're probably going to see that a lot throughout this entire competition. Being able to Shadow Melt those Pridefuls off is going to save you a lot of time, especially on this 18 scenario where they have probably about 500,000 HP. If you don't have to single target those down, you don't have to worry about doing a lot of damage and save a lot of time over the course of the dungeon. Also, it's not really too viable to pull that with Trash Packs unless you know you have all your cooldowns up, so look forward to seeing a lot of Shadow Melts skipping past those Pridefuls.
Yeah, and the beautiful use here of that Ring of Peace to make sure now a reset at Necrotic, because we do have Necrotic in this dungeon, and it looked like it was basically non-existent here on the first pull. We do see now playing Kyrian, so he does have this Kyrian Vial available to him, which also removes the Necrotic effect, which is actually pretty handy, but probably didn't have it ready for this pull, so we saw that Ring of Peace coming out to make sure he can reset it. Very nicely done, as they are now proccing that second Pride mob, and this time they decided to finish off the Pride. They also don't have Shadow Melt available at this point in time. It's still on cooldown, so that's probably why they decided to finish it off here.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I mean, having the Prideful for that first boss might be useful as well, because, the Tyrannical boss does take a lot of time to get through, so that might be one of the only ones we'll see them pull, or they're just going to go for another massive pull, and that 30% damage buff will help them out a lot here.
Yeah, we see one of those inspired mobs, this Houndmaster is inspired. They're just running through, taking it with them. It might... Actually, no, they incapped it, as you can see. Maris actually used one of his Heart Disease, the incap on that Houndmaster to make sure the inspired aura is not applied to the rest of the mobs here. So they're pulling the shard plus all of this trash together. They do have the Pride buff. That's why we see this huge amount of damage coming in by them. They just off-healing the shards AoE cast, the Thrash. Usually you could outrange it, but of course they do have melee, 2 melee even, so that's not a possibility for them. So they're just out healing that damage, making sure they just AoE nuking everything down, and it looks like they're skipping this Pride and also that Houndmaster, that inspired one. So there the Shadow Melt is coming out, they're skipping that one as they're moving on to the boss. While on the other side, we do see a Quad question mark fighting that second Pride mob as well. They do not have the option to skip this, as they have a Holy Paladin, which cannot be a Night Elf at all. So no possibility of Shadow Melting off that Pride.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, that's going to be a huge time loss for them. Like, each of those probably still takes about 20 to 30 seconds, even with the gear that they have on this tournament realm. So really not great to not have Shadow Melt on every single one of your members for those. And you can see the difference here. Echo's already pulled the boss, and question mark team is still pretty far behind right now.
Yeah, we can now see the trash percentage as well up on the screen here in the middle. You see Echo is on 63%. They actually pulled some trash on top of this boss here. Everything is just moving so quickly for them. It's really hard to even keep up with all of this action here on their side. While Quad question mark, they are on 62%. So they're just basically one pull behind. I think it's literally just the difference of the Pride mobs that they had to play, right? Because the buff that you gain from the Pride mob just does not make... It doesn't give you such a time gain that would make up for the time that you lose for finishing off the Pride itself. And it's just inefficient for this setup here for the speedrunning, because they cannot really pull anything on top of the Pride mob because it's such a huge amount of damage coming out of it, and also having to dodge those abilities as well, the debuff from the Pride, and it just makes it not efficient.
Oh yeah, for sure. But the thing you can see as well is actually Team Question Mark is actually pulling ahead of Echo purely off the back of that Holy Paladin damage. The Ashen Hollow plus the Wings is just doing a ton of work for them. You can see he's even doing more damage, well, was doing more damage than their Shadow Priest for a second there as well. So huge damage from the Holy Paladin. But now that that Ashen Hollow plus Wings is running out, you're seeing Echo retake the lead here and get further ahead on the boss.
Yeah, now they're dealing with the Houndmaster as well. The Houndmaster does have that inspired buff, which doesn't really matter on a boss because the boss is not seeable anyway. So they can just nuke it down for efficiency, getting a little bit extra percentage again while fighting the boss at the same time. We do have this one death still that happened earlier on Xayah. So the 5 seconds that they lost are still there, while Quad Question Mark played really clean so far. They're now at the exact same point in the dungeon. Both 79% trash, both just finished off that boss. So it's actually Quad Question Mark that is ahead at this point because they have the extra time, but because they have 0 deaths.
Well, the question is as well, they're going to have to deal with these Groundskeepers to proc that 4th Prideful, and they will have to kill that Prideful off before moving on to the second boss, whereas Echo can just go straight to the boss room and pull the boss once they're all Shadow Melded. So I think the Shadow Meld advantage is still helping them out here a lot, and they're going to be pretty far ahead after we get through this second boss. But it is nice to see that, you know, this meta comp isn't necessarily just 100% the best at everything. You're seeing Question Mark put up a pretty good fight here.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, this one Shadow Meld they just got there really gave them a huge advantage, as they're now already fighting Echelon, while Quad Question Mark has to deal with this Pride, as you mentioned. Echelon itself, there's not much you can do on top of it. Like, you can't really pull any trash on top, unless you feel fancy, because the door is actually closed to the next room, so you can't pull any of the other trash back. But you could pull the previous trash, but that one is pretty difficult. That's why usually we see that trash skipped on live servers, and we also see it skipped here on the MDI, just because it seems very inefficient. It's pretty dangerous as well. We have a bunch of frontals, a bunch of casts that need to be interrupted. So usually teams choose to skip it, which we see from both teams as well here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you can see the big difference here right now. 30% on that second boss just from having to kill the Pride off for Team Question Mark. Echo is just using this Shadow Meld strat to their advantage by a lot here, and it's going to help them out a lot in the future as well once we get to that, past that 5th Prideful after the mini-boss later on in the dungeon.
Yeah, definitely. We do see both of them having a good amount of single target damage. Now, when it comes to the mages, they are, of course, reliant on their combustion, but because combustion can be reduced by quite a lot, the cooldown of it, they do usually have combustions for bosses and also for the trash right afterwards. So we do see the shifting power coming out of Gingy on Echo's side, while we also see a huge amount of damage from the Shadow Priest coming out for Quad Question Mark. Shadow Priest definitely also showing that they can keep up with the damage as well. The only difference is the Shadow Priest, right, versus the Windwalker. Windwalker, though, does provide that extra physical damage for the group, but most of the damage dealers in Echo, they don't actually do that much physical damage. We see the DK, who's doing a lot of magic damage as well, and we see the Mage, of course, which does 0 physical damage. So maybe not even that advantageous to have the physical buff, compared to having the Demon Hunter, of course, which gives the magic buff, which both of the teams do have.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, the Monk is a huge advantage for them here as well. I think Munch is a much better DPS class than that Shadow Priest in general right now. A lot of their strengths this expansion early on, where they're able to stack versatility, as well as just do massive AoE damage with those spinning crank kick stacks and that Dance of Chi-Ji proc that's really powerful. This expansion is helping them out quite a bit. So the overall damage, I would not be surprised if we see at the end of the dungeon the Monk to be way higher than that Shadow Priest.
Yeah, would not be surprised about that one for sure. As the Echo did now finish off the boss, they're moving on to the next room. We do see one inspired Houndmaster again here in this room. Let's see how they deal with that one. Looks like they're just immediately pulling everything to that boss. So they're now engaging that third boss with all of the trash on top of it. This seems incredibly dangerous, not only because you have all of this trash plus the boss, but you also have the inspired aura here. So that means 2 inspired mobs, none of these ads can actually be interrupted or CC'd in any sort of way. So now just has to tank this without any help from AoE stuns or anything like that. But it looks like he did manage to survive it just fine. He also used that Kyrian Vial, it looks like, to get rid of that necrotic stack on him. And now on the other side, Quad Question Mark doing this exact same pull.
For sure. It looks pretty good for them here, but man, Echo is just crushing these bosses, pulling this trash with this boss, like you mentioned. They're going insanely fast. I think the fact that they have that Shadow Priest, and I haven't checked on the gear thing, but he could be running the PI Legendary as well, which will let him PI both himself and a target, so that's one benefit of having the Shadow Priest in the group comp. That's really going to be the only major difference, because he can PI that Holy Paladin during his cooldowns and have him do a lot of damage. You can see how much the Holy Paladin is doing once again here on this poll, by the way.
Yeah.
Keeping up with the Shadow Priest. That's just the strength of the Paladin. It's just really unfortunate that they don't have access to that Shadow Meld.
Yeah, that's true. Do you actually know if the mind control from the Venthyr, if you mind control the gargoyles with the Venthyr Covenant, does that actually count towards your damage in details?
So with details, there's a little bit of a weird interaction with that. If you mind control the gargoyle out of combat, it'll show on details, but if you mind control it in combat, it doesn't show.
Okay. So they were definitely in combat when they mind controlled, so it looks like both of the damage meters did not include that gargoyle damage, so it was literally just the Paladin's damage, yeah. It wasn't any, like, gargoyle damage added to it, probably.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, people completely underestimate the damage of Paladin right now. Like, in our raids, one of our Paladins running that setup can actually do more burst damage than any other class in the game inside of a 1-minute window. It's ridiculous how much damage Holy Paladin can do with this exact setup. But it doesn't have Shadow Meld, so in the Mythic Plus MDI scenario, it really isn't going to be that much of an advantage. That being said, they are very close behind Echo right now.
Yeah, this is really close. I mean, what's going to be the difference again is this Shadow Meld, right? Because they're head-to-head here. They have the 5 seconds advantage in their favor, but they're going to be triggering that last Pride from this mini-boss, and they just won't have a way of dodging the Pride. Well, and I mean, it's very unlikely that they're going to get the advantage back from the damage buff. Of course, if you skip the Pride, then you don't have the damage buff, so you don't have that advantage. But the time that you lose for that single target damage that you have to do to the Pride is just not making up for it. At least I very highly doubt it. As they're now moving on as well into this room, it looks like they're doing the line of sight. It's not really the line of sight strategy. They're just nuking the mini-boss in between the heals. So this mini-boss casts a heal where he just channels on those neutral mobs, and depending on if there's any neutral mobs still alive, he will just gain HP back. He will just heal himself to full HP with this Dark Communion cast. But if you manage to nuke him from 100 to 0 in between the casts, then it's no problem. And it looks like both of the teams were doing that.
Yep, for sure. I mean, they're both able to pull it off, it looks like here, so that's one entire mini-boss they pretty much don't have to worry about. None of those ads in that room, they don't have to go AoE them down. But, of course, Team Question Mark will have to deal with that Prideful, but they're probably going to go for that live strat that we see a lot of high-key push teams do, where they'll just pull the Prideful with the boss and cleave it down. And it looks like that's what Fim is going to do, but he's pretty low when he goes in, but the meta is popped for him, so it looks like he's going to be just fine. That being said, Echo has already been on the boss for about 20 seconds here, so the time advantage and the boss health percentage is huge for them. We're going to have to see if Team Question Mark picking up that Prideful bus in about 20 seconds is going to help them catch up at all, though.
I mean, they might be able to. They also have the Paladin, which does increase their single target damage by quite a bit. But because of the amount of heal that Jeeth has to do on the group because of that Pride, he might not be able to do as much damage as he usually does. So that's going to be a little bit of an issue. And then they also have to dodge not only the debuffs, but also the ads. But there we go. The Pride is down, so now they can nuke the boss. And you see the damage difference. I mean, the HP difference here at the bottom. It is still really close. It is a tyrannical environment, so of course, the difference that we have right now is a bit bigger than it would be on 45, but we still have the 5 seconds advantage for Quad Question Mark, so this can still be incredibly close.
And it also looks like they're actually catching up too, with the wings now just being popped from Jeeth here as well. Their damage is going to go up quite a bit, but the Lust is also now coming out for Echo. So, man, this is going to end up being a really close DPS race here at the end. And like you mentioned, Question Mark does have that 5 second advantage, which could easily be the 6% behind they are on the boss right now.
This is so incredibly close. It looks like Combustion for Gingy is going to come up in a second, right before the boss is going to go down. We do see Combustion just has been popped for Petco, so they're going to be a little bit ahead in burst damage here in a second once Gingy has his Combustion up. There we go, Combustion is being popped, and it looks like the boss is melting at this point. I'm not sure if Quad Crasher Marth can make up for this. This 5 seconds is probably just not going to be enough, as Lord Chamberlain is going down for Echo, and we're counting down to 5 seconds. I don't think this is going to be enough. They're just running out of damage at this point, but so close. Wow.
Dominance throughout this, but it was a very, very close game, as you guys have mentioned as well. They take the victory in game number 1, but wow, I don't know how frequently, Dradnos, we really have that close of game between our 1st seed and our 8th seed.
Yeah, that was one of the closest games I've seen, and it was between a 1st seed and an 8th seed. It was our first game of the season. That is really, really a treat. Great to see that. Hopefully that's setting the stage for a lot of games like that this season.
Absolutely. And you know that Echo's got to be absolutely thrilled about that as well. I mean, very minimal deaths. It's their first time back in the competition for almost a year as well, Zyro.
Yeah, for sure. And I also want to point out as well that was about a 1 minute faster time from time trials for Team Question Mark as well. So they were definitely performing insanely there. And yeah, the Holy Paladin looks like it's actually a pretty strong pick, even though you have to deal with, 4 extra Pridefuls. So maybe we can see some more of that in the future based off of that as well. But yeah, Echo definitely come into play. I don't think we expected any less from them.
Of course, and that kind of goes to show how well that we've started seeing some of the meta changes. We started seeing some of the class changes coming up as well, Nagura, compared to previous seasons, and these guys are just able to mold themselves and optimize every single spec they come into contact with.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this before, that they are very good at adapting their roster, their setup. They're just really, really good at multi-classing, which is so incredibly important for an MDI like this, because you want to adapt to any sort of affix you have, any sort of situation, seasonal affixes, and so on. So the pure ability to do this and play all of the classes so well just shows how good Echo is, really.
No question. And the competition's been very, very tight leading up to the time trials as well, Dradnos. I think there was like 5 or 6 minute difference or something like that between a whole range of teams. I think it was like 3rd through 8th or something along those lines for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, all of our top 8 finishers in the time trials ended up within less than a 10-minute range from each other, which is remarkable as well. It's a really close field, and it just goes to show, I mean, this game was not even one where it was a wipe separating these teams. It was less than a single wipe separating these two teams at the end there, which is, I mean, it's incredible, especially given that these are the two teams that are supposed to be the farthest apart, right? The 1st and the 8th seed. So if this is the least close matchup we have, I can't wait to see the close ones, because it came down to the wire.
That's right, and let's start going over some of that as well throughout our replay here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this game. I think one thing as well to note is Covenant choice. There were some things that surprised me about it as well. For instance, you can see fragments here in this part of the dungeon where actually Echo lost the most time was when Xaylia died here. This opened up, I'd say 30 seconds that brought the game a lot closer than it otherwise might have been. But Fragments is actually their Death Knight. He's playing their Venthyr in this dungeon, not their Priest, which you might normally expect. Similarly, on the other side, both priests in this series were playing Night Fae for those Fae Guardians, rather than playing Venthyr for the mind games and mind controlling the gargoyles. And then on this team, the Question Mark gang, Jeeth was playing their Venthyr player. As you can see, that enables the Ashen Hallow on these boss pull situations. Here comes that Ashen Hallow, pops the wings as well. And you're going to see Jeeth just role-playing as both their top damage dealer for a bit, their top healer for a bit. He's just doing the entire dungeon for them during the duration of those 30 seconds every 4 minutes of the Venthyr Ashen Hallow. And this pull, it looked really, really strong for them. But what Echo was able to make happen with this pull was at the end of this boss, after they managed to do a similarly impressive big pull at the start of it, they pulled in a piece of trash right at the end, and then they killed it right after the boss. They mounted up while the 80% Prideful was spawning, and then they did their skip and did a Shadow Meld, which the sequencing of events there is really impressive and well timed. We're gonna get to see that I think in just a second here in the replay, and that part of the strategy worked really, really nicely for them, and is an example of just where they were saving this time with Shadow Meld. Much as I like to talk about that, though, even though they were, melding these prides, we saw the question marks doing the prides and really coming with a close time. I'd say that the two routes were separated by probably less than 30 seconds theoretically, which is, as much as we're going to see a lot of 5 Night Elf action to make use of it here. The fact that you can just kill the pride, invis pot, and then you have the prideful for the boss, and that makes the boss faster, especially on these tyrannical dungeons, of which all 3 in this first series have that tyrannical affix. That brings a lot of advantages too, and I think that it is absolutely competitive, especially when you have such cooldown-oriented specs as that team did. Even every single spec on that team had those cooldowns. Here's that skip I was talking about, though. You spawn the pride right after killing the boss, and then you can see they have the pride active as they are getting ready to run through here, needing to make sure they're careful of that boast, the 4 direction, cardinal direction stun thing. So they're really taking their time with that skip there. That's the kind of thing you could tell. It was really well practiced, well honed, and I'm sure they wiped that a couple times in practice to learn exactly how to execute that skip, get up here to Echelon, and even though they didn't have the pride buff, that time they saved ended up making it so that when they got to this last boss, they had opened up enough of a lead to be able to overcome the cooldowns lined up with Prideful from the other team. Again, close match, very close match. A lot of great play from both teams involved here. The Necrotic just chunking those tanks, but of course, playing Kyrian, they have that File of Serenity to remove those bleeds at the most crucial moments in each dungeon. Extremely, extremely strong there. And that is how Echo took game 1 here.
Yeah, no question. Thanks so much for that. And I loved as well, you'd mentioned it previously, seeing the Night Fae coming out for the Priest. Something you really don't see a lot of healing Priest players actually run with. And being able to just start reducing other people's cooldowns, taking advantage of that Fae Guardians. And also I like how with this strategy, they're skipping a lot of Prideful, so mana starts becoming a lot more of a concern for the Disc Priest. So you also have the other fairy that's going to be able to give you a lot more mana regen rolling into it. So Echo taking game number 1 with some excellent strategies, but also very close. And Plaguefall's coming up with Tyrannical, Raging, and Explosive. And Zyro, some of these are more, classic affixes that have been around for a very long time, but Shadowlands makes it a lot easier to kill explosives these days as well.
Oh yeah, those explosives have actually about 100 HP each, so anybody can just look at them for half a second and take them out. But the question is, who in your group is going to be doing it? So I'm interested to see who's going to be taking that elf for their team as well. But you got to keep an eye on Raging too. A lot of these trash mobs, even on Tyrannical and Plaguefall, can be pretty dangerous for your tank, especially after that first boss when he starts to get those minus stat debuffs on him as well. So gonna have to keep an eye on that Raging affix. Tanks could easily get one shot here if they're not playing safe.
They could.
How is Priest to kill explosives, Jack? How is this Priest?
It's actually pretty good. I mean, you have Purge the Wicked that you're able to just instantly one-shot them with. So a lot of times, as long as you're able to target everything and the whole mess of mobs that you're going to be able to have access to, you can stand back at range. You can be out of the mess, out of the churn that happens a lot of times in Plaguefall, especially whenever you have any of like the slimes or anything else running around. You can just sit back and take out all of them pretty much. So maybe have a little bit of help here and there depending on how large of a pull they go into, but shouldn't be too big of a problem at all.
Then it's the healer's job.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I remember for a while, whenever there was Holy Paladins and Explosives still had a lot of HP, Holy Paladins were the ones who were just that guaranteed one-shot for it. So now they've decided to bring all the healers into the job. Oh boy.
With Plaguefall and Raging in particular, it's interesting because there's the mobs that explode for damage, and I think that is scaled by Raging as well. The ones that die when they're low health with the explodey barrel. So maybe we'll see teams making use of that. The Raging affix, though, also one challenge with it is you want to have a way to soothe it, ideally, in a group if there's going to be mobs that are going to be scary for hitting your tank, which there are some in this dungeon. But none of the classes that we saw last dungeon have the soothe ability, right? You've got like hunters, druids, rogues now with Shiv can do it. All of those are specs that teams consider and teams have used for some dungeons, but none of them were in that last dungeon. So we'll have to see if they decide to make an adjustment, make a shift into something that gives them the ability to soothe, say, those rocks if they decide to pull those, or the big abomination things if needed, or if they decide, we're not going to be doing any pulls where we need this, and we're going to stick with a different comp instead.
What would you run with, Zyro? What would you change up for any of those compositions?
I don't know if I'd change it too much, actually. I mean, You got to remember, these trash packs are just going to die instantly. Your tank's just going to have to kite a bunch. That's pretty much it. I wouldn't worry about adding an extra soothe in there at all.
Interesting. Well, we'll see what's going to be happening into it as these teams are getting themselves ready. And again, these are all plus 18 dungeons that they're going to be having. All of the dungeons are going to have Prideful as well. And Nagar, we were talking before about some of the new affixes coming to the table. Halls of Atonement had Inspiring, and you really kind of nailed it where they didn't really have to worry about it too terribly much at all because of the fact that it was tyrannical.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a similar thing with Raging here, as we just mentioned, just because of that tyrannical affix and its 18 keys as well. The amount of damage that these teams have just makes them ignore some of those affixes on those bigger pools. So I think it's going to be very similar with Raging. When we have other affixes like maybe Spiteful, they might have to be a little bit more careful, because if they start killing off some of those smaller HP mobs and the Spitefuls start spawning out, they could very well get one-shot. So definitely an affix that maybe not, that it won't be as easy, but we don't have that one here.
Yeah, let's get ourselves ready for game number 2 as Echo and Quad Question Marks are starting their first pulls in Plagueful.
Oh yeah, and getting right into it with a huge triple pull right off the bat, you're going to have to keep an eye on those Fungus Storm casts here, because if you let too many of those go off, especially in the Raging Affix, this team can wipe instantly. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that Grip Sigil just now coming out from now there, and they're going to have to make sure they have a stun, probably from their Windwalker Monk on either side as well, which will help them out. But we didn't even talk about the comp changes here. Jeeth has swapped from that Paladin to a Priest, and Curry has swapped from the Priest over to a Windwalker Monk, so a much more meta comp coming out from them.
Yeah, so they're running the exact same comp here. We don't see any changes at all. So no hunters, additionally, no druids. So they do not have any way of getting rid of that raging effect, which, you know, probably means what we just said earlier, that they're just going to be ignoring it, just kiting it, and so on. Looks like they decide to play the Pride mob here on Echo side, as they already procced it. A huge pull that they did 21% trash in that very first pull, while Quad Question Mark on the other side, they only got that 11% and are now doing a second pull. So definitely a much bigger pull happened on Echo side, as they're now dealing with that Pride. Interesting to see that they're not choosing to skip this specific one, since they are all Night Elves, meaning they could just Shadow Meld it off, but decided not to.
Yeah, and I wonder if this means they're going to go for this massive pull where they just pull everything in this room into the boss. That would be the only reason I'd see them going for that damage and healing buff. Kind of interested to see if they're going to pull it off here, but we're going to look at Team Question Mark also going for it. Well, they didn't go for quite the similar first pull here as well. They definitely cut it in two quite a bit. But now is setting up to pull the boss here, and they're not pulling any of the trash in the room. They're opting to pull absolutely none of it. They're just going straight to the boss and killing on that tiny little island there.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, this might be decently difficult since this tyrannical and this first boss does have a huge amount of HP, but it looks like they're just getting knocked to this other side. And I actually thought this boss might just reset if you drag him this far away, but apparently not. They can just tank it on the side here and not having to worry about that reset. And you can see the Plague rocks here, the Plague Bellorer is just not pulling because they're just too far away, so they can just deal with the boss by itself, which, yeah, very interesting to see that they figured this out, that it doesn't reset and they can just tank it here. Well, on the other side, Quad Question Mark did have a little bit of a problem with their tank going down. It looked like they pulled a mob that they weren't supposed to pull, one of those Plague Rocks. I assume, at least, they didn't want to, and that's why they had some issues there. But they have now recovered and are now moving on to pull some of these blobs here. So completely different strategies coming out from those two teams.
Well, the boss just healed just now for Echo as well. They let some of those slimy morsels come in and hit the boss, so he healed for a decent amount. Now, the slimy smorgasbord didn't come in, so the boss didn't get that massive healing buff, but, you know, not exactly the greatest the greatest execution from them there. They're going to get that second major ad here, which they're going to have to make sure they CC away from the boss, though, so it could be dangerous. But the boss is pretty low, so I can't imagine that would go too wrong for them here.
Yeah, and now we do see Quad Question Mark just dealing with those bigger mobs. Now, they're usually pretty annoying just because all of these slimy morsels that are coming in here, they need to be CC'd or need to be killed, which is a pretty big annoyance because they don't give any percentage, of course, as they are part of this Plague Belcher. That means that you don't necessarily want to waste the damage on them, but if you don't have any good CCs, then they go through, as we can see here, and just heal the Belcher and give him a damage increase. So very annoying to deal with if you don't have anything like a Mass Root or a Fierce Sigil coming in. So now we do see the Frost Nova being used by Petco, making sure they are a little bit CC'd at least, but it really just looks like they're having some trouble with this single mob. They were probably just running out of CDs. No one had anything ready, and that's why it took so long.
And now they also don't have Prideful for the boss, whereas Echo did. So we might even have to see Team Question Mark deal with not 3, but definitely 2 sets of ads on this boss. Whereas Echo is just moving on ahead with the rest of the dungeon. Now I'm interested to see what they plan on doing here for Trash. If they're just going to pull it all together and AoE it all down instantly, or if they plan on using some of those sort of Siege of Borealis-esque mobs to nuke all this Trash down. Wouldn't be surprised to see either one of them, actually.
Yeah, I first thought they might not be using any of those explosives just because sometimes the time to set something like this up costs you more time than what you save from just getting this extra damage. But if it's easy to set up and the mobs are just right next to it, then it's definitely worth it. And we saw them just do it right there. We did see the Double CC come in for this 2 mob a pack group, just because there's one slime that has this annoying damage reduction aura, and you really don't want to deal with that one. So that's why they succeeded, and they're probably just going to Shadow Melt off the aggro later on. So now dealing with this bigger pack here, we see now actually having a little bit of a problem dealing with this trash pack, but he did now recover, and they're moving on. We see the Pride pulled as well. Okay, so this is actually very good timing for them, because now they can Shadow Melt off the aggro from the 2 CC'd mobs. And they're also Shadow Melting off the Pride at the same time. Looks like they're doing even a bigger skip here, where they also skip those tentacles as well.
Right, so they're not only Shadow Melting the Prideful, but they're also Shadow Melting all the tentacles. They're Shadow Melting all of the slimes that spawn from the large ad when it dies, because those transform. I think you have to wait until they transform in order to Shadow Meld them off, because they have global aggro if they do transform. But they will be dealing with this mini boss, which does give a decent amount of percentage on its own, and this should set them up pretty well to have that 60% trash count for the boss. But you know, I don't know if they actually want that, because usually you want to just skip the Prideful again with Shadow Meld, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Franklin's actually going down here on their side, and it looks like Quad Question Mark has even more issues, as they also have some deaths on their side. They have some blobs going through on the boss as well. Looks like this might just be a whole wipe for Quad Question Mark, unfortunately. Now, we do see on Echo's side, they don't manage to get Fragnance back up at the moment, because Fragnance is the DK. He is the one with the battle rest, so they might just have to finish this off and get him out. But now it's going down too. This might be some even more problems, and they don't have Shadow Melt available because they just used this, so they can't actually de-aggro and get a rest out. They did manage to finish off most of the important mobs here, so they might be able to kite this out, but it's only Gingy and Sally alive at this point.
And they don't have Shadow Meld because they just used it, so
yeah,
this is going to be really unfortunate.
Sally has as well.
He's completely yeah. Maybe he's going to try to die in a good spot, and then Gingy can battle res him with the engineering item if he gets the invisibility off. That might be the play, or Gingy's just trying to deal with the mob on his own. He's off screen right now, so we can't quite see what he's doing, but it looks like... How did he actually drop aggro?
Gingy just died.
Okay. Looks like they're good
like
now.
Sally, I'm not sure if he's still in combat, or... He's definitely waiting, so he might be in combat here. Otherwise, he will be resting or something. So it looks like there's still... Yeah, there's this one Blight Weaver is still alive. And he's raging as well. He cannot get rid of the raging effect. This... I'm not sure if this is even a time save at this point, but I'm sure they called it on their voice channel for Salia to finish this off. They seem to be thinking that this is going to be a time save. We do see the Shadow Fiend as well by Sally, just basically soloing this mob at this point. So Sally doing a very good job line of sighting. Yeah, he got it. So now he can get the Mass Res off. Well done by the rest of the team here, making sure they kite out this mini boss, and actually managed to finish it off. So well done. It took a little bit of time, but they did manage.
They did manage, and like you mentioned as well, it might not have been the best thing for them to do, because at some point you have to realize that you just have to skip it and full wipe and go back. But maybe with how low the mini boss was, they decided that it'd just be better for them to try to finish it off, even though it did cost them the extra couple of deaths there. They were able to, just barely get through it. And that's one of the qualities of this team, this particular Echo team, previously Wunderbar, previously Method EU. They've just always been really good at making the best out of a terrible scenario, where they're able to just kind of eke out pulls even if things go wrong. And good to see that hasn't changed much for them.
Yeah, definitely well done here to make sure that they recover from this tragic death here by Fragrance, and then now right afterwards. Now, they do see a pretty big pull here. I think they pulled all of the trash from all 3 platforms here together. They did in-cap the Congealed Slime, which is the slime that gives the damage reduction aura, so they don't want to deal with that one. They might just... Okay, looks like they're attacking it now, maybe on top of the Pride as well. Yes, looks like they're dealing with the Pride here, while Jeeth and the Quad Question Mark group, they're having some issues with the first boss. It looked like they didn't manage to finish it off, so now they have a full reset. They have to try again, which just means that there's no way for them to catch up to Echo at this moment in time. There really was a chance for them to catch up once Echo had this issue with the skip, but because Quad Question Mark had the same issues on their first boss pool, having this full team wipe, just means that the amount of time that Echo lost was less than the amount of time that Quad Question Mark lost, and therefore Echo is still fairly in the lead, not only boss-wise and time-wise in the dungeon, but also percentage-wise, and 5 deaths difference in favor of Echo as well.
Yeah, and you can see that these guys really don't want to use any of their DPS cooldowns on the Pride right now. Xaylia is definitely screaming at his DPS to finish it off, but now they have Lust, they have all of their cooldowns and a 30% damage buff as well as they get into this boss, and on top of that they also have that haste aura from the red blob. You can see it on the ground there, gives you 25% haste to deal with this boss as well, and it looks like Gingy's actually saving the combust, maybe to try to phase a little bit faster, just now popped it. Now, having Prideful for this boss actually makes sense versus other bosses in the dungeon, because if you're able to double phase this boss quickly enough, you won't have to deal with either of the 2 slimes, and that'll save you a lot of time on this boss, but I'm not really sure if they're going to be able to do that on 18 Tyrannical.
They might just have to deal. Looks like they're dealing with the first Plague Bomb. Yeah, okay, so they are switching to the first bomb, but they're very likely not going to deal with the second one. The Congealed Slime did get knocked out by one of the players and then incapped by Maris, so they don't have to deal with that aura, the damage aura reduction, and they can just focus on the blob and now the boss. The explosives are just being dealt with easily. Looks like even on those really big pulls, we just barely saw any of those explosives at all. They're just immediately being dealt with by the melee players, it looks like, and specifically also now and Xaylia are helping with those explosives. Not an issue for these teams at all now with the less HP that they have, which just makes it a lot easier for them to kill it. And now we see them facing the boss very soon, and then we'll see if they actually manage to finish off the boss before, without even having to go on the blob, or if they have to switch.
I mean, they've got all their cooldowns up. They've got Combust up in a sec. They've got Power Infusion ready. Miraz has both Weapons of Order, Tiger, and 2 stacks of Storm Earth and Fire up. They should be able to burn this boss, no problem. The only major issue is going to be if that purple slime gets in on top of the boss and gives it that damage reduction aura. But it's instantly knocked out by Xaylia.
Yeah, well done there. Immediate just knock coming out from the priest, making sure they Fear Sigil it as well out there to not having to deal with that at all. And now they're finishing off the boss, but it looks like it's actually kind of close. It is close to exploding here, as you can see on the cast bar below that bomb. So yeah, that was decently close. It looked like it's on Tyrannical 18 key. It's definitely not as easy as it might be in a 45. So you really want to make sure you have those offensive cooldowns ready to make sure you finish off the boss before that bomb goes off. But they did manage, and now they're moving on to this next area. Looks like they're even fooding up first. They probably know they're ahead at this point, so they're just playing it safe, making sure they have everything available to them, are as strong as possible to not have any further mistakes here, because that's the only thing that would make them lose this dungeon at this point, right? Making any sort of mistakes or having any sort of full wipes.
Man, that's like... that's a pretty big BM, man. Going for the full 10-second food buff on everyone in your group mid-dungeon. And like you said, yeah, they probably know how ahead they are, because they're definitely allowed to have the broadcast up on their other monitor, and they probably saw that Team Question Mark was having an issue with good old Globgrog. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense. It makes this next room a lot safer. These ambushers in this next room can be very deadly on your tank, especially in this Raging Affix. So, wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of cooldowns popped on these next few pulls, but can I make a little offshoot for a little more trash percentage here?
Yeah, it looks like they're dealing with some of the trash on the side here. There's quite a lot of trash in this area just sitting there on the side. Some of them are fighting each other, so some of them might actually be low HP already when you engage them, which makes it pretty efficient to deal with it. On live keys, we don't see this trash pulled that often, but we definitely do see some routes where people make sure to deal with those. We do have those Defender of Many Eyes, which can be annoying because they cast quite a few abilities that slow you down, like this bubble that reduces damage done. But it can just be this bulwark, there it is, but it can be knocked or stunned, and we saw it immediately being interrupted by one of the players here in Echo, so well done there. As they're now moving on, they're up to 75% trash at this point. They still need approximately 8 to 10% before they can go down into the last boss room. So they're dealing with this trash pack here in this room as well. We have a bunch of ambushers here as well, which can be a problem, as Cyro mentioned, because of this stealth links cast that needs to be get out of before the ambush gets through, and just a bunch of other annoying abilities that these ambushers cast.
Right, for sure, but it looks like it's not going to be an issue for them. Able to melt through that trash easily enough, and they have a lot of tools to deal with those ambushes as well. You've got the Dragon Breath, you've got the Ring of Peace, you've got a whole bunch of things just able to deal with those ambushes. So they should never really get any casts off. But yeah, like you mentioned, they need about 83% trash before they finish off this third boss and go down. Otherwise, they won't have enough trash count to finish off the dungeon. So I'll probably see them get to that percentage easily enough. And really, the only thing left between Echo and finishing off this dungeon is 2 relatively difficult Tyrannical bosses. Even on 18, even in the gear they're in, there's a lot of room for mistakes to be made on these bosses, and we've seen them make mistakes in this dungeons already.
Yeah, definitely a possibility that they have some issues, especially on the last boss. We know how difficult that last boss can be, as there's just so much AoE damage coming in. But it looks like they're struggling with the Pride already, as Salia is dropping so incredibly low, just not wanting to use any of those offensive cooldowns. Salia just having so much trouble making sure the whole group stays alive. But they did manage to finish it off now, and it looks like they're pulling the boss with this left trash pack. So definitely a very dangerous pull to do for them, as we have a lot of AoE damage coming in by the boss itself once she starts casting those nets that you need to get out of those nets. And we also see the trash pack just getting melted though, just immediately melted with that Pride buff and all cooldowns being popped by the Echo damage dealers. So no problem for Echo, as their boss is already on 50% at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just easy to get it through with the comp you're running. Mira's can easily AoE those down with a double Storm Earth and Fire there, and his weapons of order. Windwalker Monk just has so much damage in their 30-second cooldown window. You can see he's doing more than the Mage and the DK, which are 2 of the most highly represented classes in the game right now. So, perfect scenario for them as well. And they only have to deal with one more set of Brute Assassins after dealing with that trash pretty easily.
Yeah, and we do see a new ad wave spawning here on the boss for Echo. They get them out immediately. We see now just jumping around, making sure all of those assassins are out. And as soon as they are down, there's no more danger for now. But those ads can actually do quite a bit of damage and quite a bit of pressure onto the tank, on top of also having the boss damage. But if you have huge amounts of AoE bursts like they do, then it turns out to not be an issue for them. And we also see that ambush cast on Salia going out. Gingy is going to Salia when he's stunned to make sure he doesn't get wept by the boss. So well done by them, as they're now finishing off the boss. On the other side, Quad question mark did have some more issues, unfortunately. We saw Fam go down a little bit earlier. Now they're up to 12 deaths. That means 60 seconds on top of their timer here, unfortunately. Just a bunch of issues for them, really, in this dungeon specifically. Might have something to do with their comp swap. Maybe they tried to play their Paladin comp and then decided to switch later on, as they saw that they just have to play that Shadowmeld comp. And maybe that's where the issues are stemming from, or maybe there's just some other stuff going on with them. Because, I mean, anything can happen. We also see Echo making that mistake, which is not usual for them. Like, they don't usually make any of those huge mistakes. So definitely something that can happen for any of the teams. But making sure that they just continue and recover, because there's still something that can go wrong for Echo. There's still its last boss that can be very dangerous, especially when you have explosive, right? Because we have all of those ads spawn all over the room, which means there's explosives also possible to spawn all over the room. And the only people who can deal with ranged explosives is Gingy and Salia, right? So definitely can cause some issues.
But it looks like it's not going to be any issue at all for them, as Gingy is able to deal with those explosives pretty easily on his own outside the group. And he's also just soloing that one trash pack. As you can see, he has aggro on it. So not an issue for them at all. And they only have the major mini-boss left, who's kind of annoying as he ghost steps around the room occasionally. But hopefully they'll be able to get him down here before that final ghost step.
Yeah, and you can see that the mini-boss is also raging. I think that's also what caused them to have this wipe earlier, just the fact that they don't have this raging removal in this group. Just no class in that group, in that setup, can remove the raging, which can cause some issues, especially if you don't have any interrupts. So they want to make sure that they interrupt all of those raging mini-bosses once they are in that range. It looked like they did it well this time around, as they're now moving on to the boss, which is the last thing they have to finish off to win this dungeon and also win the series against the number 8 seed Quad, which are still struggling on that third boss. So let's see how they deal with this last boss here on Echo.
And also, I want to give a little shout out to their positioning there as well. As they were finishing off the mini boss, everyone moved away as far away from the boss as they could, because you got to remember that the Prideful spawns in proximity of a random player in your group. So they needed to spawn that Prideful as far away from the boss so they could then instantly jump to the boss and Shadow Meld off aggro. And you can see they just pulled that off perfectly there. The positioning was great. But you can see already the danger of this boss, even on 18 Tyrannical. They're getting their second Infectious Raincast already in this phase, and that's really, it's a really dangerous ability. It does a lot of damage to your group, especially when there's a 4-stack on everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And we also see them just focus the boss instead of going into this malignant spawn. Just because the boss is percentage based, so the faster you push the boss lower, the earlier she will go in this intermission phase, and then you can just deal with the ad once she's down. Now, if you don't manage to push fast enough though, then she might spawn a second ad, and that will cause some trouble, because if you have 2 ads up at the same time and no one is soaking those frontals and the tentacles also going up on both sides, then you will have some issues. So definitely want to make sure you make the push on the boss, otherwise you will have to focus that ad. But it looks like they perfectly know when they have to focus the ad and when they can focus the boss.
Right, for sure. And it looks like in this phase they should be able to just go ahead and burn through the boss here, not dealing with the malignant spawns, because they did have the cooldowns available from both their monk and their mage there. And the boss is already pushing here into that second intermission, so it looks like it paid off perfectly for them.
Yeah, they're doing a good job as they're now in the second intermission, just dodging those tentacles back and forth. It really is a set sequence of tentacle spawns that you get each time you enter this transition. You also have these Plague-bound Devoted spawn, which, to be honest, they can just be CC'd and ignored, because you just have to finish off the boss. You don't have to deal with those ads if you don't want to. So theoretically, you could throw some hard CCs on them if you have any, and just ignore them. Once the boss is back up, they just finish off the boss. We see all of the cooldowns that they still have left are being popped, specifically that combustion by Gingy, as they're just bursting the boss at this point. The last phase is the most difficult phase on this fight, just because not only do you have to deal with the boss and the ads that spawn, you also get these tentacle sequences that you have to dodge at the same time. So can cause some issues, but no issues for Echo, as they're now finishing off the boss, and they're gonna win the series 2-0. Well done, Echo.
Very well done by our defending champions here, and absolutely phenomenal looking at what they are skipping and aren't skipping for some of these Pridefuls. Like, Plaguefall is such this big, wide, expansive dungeon in so many cases, and looking at how well they were able to maneuver around here, Dranos, was absolutely a sight to see.